Welcome to Front Office Pros, brought to you by the Front Office Pros, Steve and Joe. The NFL season is less than 2 months away, and we've been going through divisional breakdowns as we prepare for the season. Today's division is the AFC West, Joe's division. And with us to break it all down is Tristan Cook. Tristan is a Dynasty writer and the Denveri team lead for Dynasty Nerds. Tristan, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about my division as well, being a lifelong Broncos fan.
Hike!
So last season, guys, it did not go so well for your Denver Broncos, but as this is how the standings went. So the division champions who ended up being the Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs, went 14-3. The Los Angeles Chargers went 10-7. The Las Vegas Raiders went 6-11, and then the Broncos got last, and they were 5-12. So based on what has happened this offseason, what is your guys' prediction on who will be the AFC West Division champion?
Yeah, I think it's the Chiefs division to lose. I don't think any of the other teams are on their level. I think the Chargers are, could push them a little bit, but I think the Chiefs are pretty sizable step above the rest of the teams in the AFC West. As much as that pains me to admit, they are the class of the division, and I don't think that's changing this year. Maybe in a handful of years, but not anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree, Tristan. It definitely is painful to admit, but I don't see anything different. Chiefs have been the top dog of the division for a bit now, and it's definitely not changing this year.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Consensus here. Kansas City Chiefs are going to be, I think, the division winner. And so long as Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes are all in the fold, I think it's going to be quite difficult to take them out of that seat. The AFC West, I think, is one of the more difficult divisions. So it's one of those things that maybe they won't be a lock for the number one seed because they're going to have to battle it out. I thought maybe with the Tyreek Hill trade, that was kind of the question of will they still be good? And then they were still really good. So I think at this point, I'm going to have to be surprised for them to be supplanted as the division champion. So this will be interesting. I'm curious what you guys have to say here. What teams will be a wild card team in the AFC West, or if any?
Yeah, I think the Chargers will be. I think that they, 10 wins is a pretty good step for them. They always struggle with a lot of injuries, so it really comes down to if they can keep their best players on the field at least the majority of the time. I think they'll probably make the playoffs as a wild card. I would love to say the Broncos would, but I would be lying to you to tell you that I actually think that they will. I think they could get to 8-9 or 9-8 or whatever. One of those records is kind of what I think is a realistic expectation for them, which I don't expect to be a wild card team. But yeah, I think there'll be one, and it'll be the Chargers.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be the Chargers. I think it's going to be the Broncos. I really believe in the Sean Payton coaching change and what he's going to bring to the offense. I mean, if the Broncos would have averaged 18 points a game last year with the offense, they would have had 10, 11 wins and been in that conversation. So I think with Sean Payton, and it was interesting, James Palmer was saying over the last few years, the difference in the coaching changes and coupled with changes at quarterback. I know the Broncos don't fit in there, but just changes in coaching, teams have averaged a jump of at least 4 to 6 games in their win total from the year before. You saw the Jaguars do it after Urban Meyer. They jumped up, got a wild card team. The Vikings, jumped up to the 13 wins, so they had a big win differential. So I think Sean Payton could have that type of impact, and if that happens, the Broncos will be a wild card team.
I would love it.
Yeah, that I'm sure you both would be excited.
I just don't believe in the Chargers and Brandon Staley as the head coach. I thought they should have made a head coaching change. Like Tristan said, they always struggle with injuries, And even as bad as the Broncos were, they were very competitive with the Chargers last year, and the Chargers really struggled against them. So, I like them second in division to make the wild card.
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to side with Tristan here, Joe. I'm going to go with the Chargers as the other division winner. I've already said that the Jets are going to be – wild card winner. I already have the Jets getting a wild card, the Browns getting a wild card, and now I'm going with the Chargers as the last team. It's one of those things that I wondered about possibly the Broncos because they say anywhere from 4 to 6 teams, there's like a changeover of those teams – make it to the playoffs that weren't a playoff team before. And I wondered if that could have possibly been the Chargers, but I just think they're just too talented of a team. I think that now that they've got even more offensive firepower for Justin Herbert, I really like the addition of Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. I think he's going to do wonders for that offense. Remember, Staley is a defensive oriented coach. So I think Kellen Moore and him are going to do really, really well. So I do like Sean Payton. Well, I don't like that they gave up the first-round pick, but that's neither here or there. I think he's going to be a good coach. He's going to bring stability that Hackett didn't bring them. I think that at the end of the day, though, they're not going to – they don't have the talent compared to the other two teams. So going over to the teams that missed the playoffs. So what's the order for the teams that missed the playoffs? Each of us had one wild card team. So where do the other two teams fall?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hinted at it. I think Denver will be flirting with being just above 500. So I have them at third, and I have the Raiders at kind of a distant cellar dweller team this year. I don't think that's very surprising. Jimmy Garoppolo is, a very handsome quarterback, but I don't know that he's a very good quarterback. He's fine, but their team isn't built for a, average NFL quarterback to make them good. Derek Carr is, no worse than Jimmy Garoppolo, and he couldn't make them a real contender. So I don't think that the Raiders are really going to be much of a force to be reckoned with. They'll probably beat, either both the Chargers and the Chiefs because they always seem to give their division teams difficulty, but I think they're going to be like a 6-ish win team this season. They maybe 7, maybe 8, but I don't think that they're going to I don't think they're going to get out of 4th or tied for last in their division.
Yeah, for me, as I mentioned before, it's Chargers 3rd, and then I agree with Tristan. There's definitely a gap there, with the Raiders at 4 compared to the top 3 teams in our division.
Yeah, I'm following Tristan's trail here. Number 3 is going to be the Broncos, and number 4 is going to be the Raiders. I think the Raiders, it's interesting because if the Raiders were in a different division, would it be different for them? I'm just not buying the Jimmy G. Who knows if Jimmy G plays? I mean, what if he doesn't pass his physical with his foot? Then they got Aiden O'Connell playing at quarterback? I think they're going to be in some serious trouble. I think they botched the Derek Carr thing. I think Derek Carr's a mediocre quarterback, but at the same time, it's like you then went and got Jimmy G. At the end of the day, I don't see him coming in, making a big change. And I really don't like what's going on with the whole Josh Jacobs fiasco. I don't think that the Raiders have plenty of cap space to be able to sign Josh Jacobs. And just because he's a running back, they're not signing him, which is quite disrespectful. As you can see, a lot of the running backs, including some other running backs in the division, a la Austin Eckler, not very happy with how the running back market is being treated financially. So I don't really like it. And what weapons do they have? I mean, they've got Devontae Adams, who I think is obviously one of the best. But how's he going to do with Jimmy G? And then he's got Jacoby Myers. They trade away Darren Waller. They've got the rookie. So I could go on and on. The Raiders, it doesn't seem good. The thing with the Broncos is my biggest question mark was with Russell Wilson. Was that an anomaly last year? Was that just a complete circus show with Nathaniel Hackett? Or is it like his play, now that he's getting older, for whatever reason, he's just lost it? That's the big question mark. I don't know. I'd like to think that Russ still has it. He's looking more slender. I think he's determined and motivated. But what do you guys think, real quick? Are we thinking we're going to get the Russell Wilson of last year? We're going to get the Russell Wilson of like a few years ago, when he's talking about possibly being like an MVP candidate, somewhere in the middle? What's your confidence level in Russell Wilson right now?
I'm a little closer to the Russell Wilson of old than the Russell Wilson of last year. I don't think that he's going to be the like insane, all world, yet somehow not getting any MVP votes, Seattle version of Russell Wilson that they had for, his prime. I think he's past that. But I do think that last year was much more of an anomaly than it was what is, to be expected going forward. I think that, 80% of the Russell Wilson that was in Seattle for most of a decade would be an outstanding quarterback to have. And I think that he definitely has that in his capability. So I think that it's going to be hopefully a major step up from what we saw last year, but not quite to the same level that the Seahawks fans got to, enjoy for several years there. But I do think that it was a bit of an anomaly. You don't forget how to play the position. The thing that really worries me the most was in Seattle after that finger ligament injury that he had. It really seemed to mess with his ability to throw, and then he came to Denver. So I have my real concern is injury related, and if his throwing is knocked a bit, that might actually be a bigger issue than anything. But there haven't been any reports or anything like that. So generally speaking, I'm pretty confident we'll get most of the good Russell Wilson back.
Yeah, I agree. I think last year is more so an anomaly. He's not going to be contending for MVPs like he was in his prime in Seattle. I think those days are over. But, I just think the Nathaniel Hackett system was just too complex for him. He didn't know how to read and go through his progressions last year. I think Sean Payton's going to figure out what he can and can't do and focus on what he can do and really simplify the offense and make things easy for him and get the best out of them. And, what was encouraging last year is those last few games we saw after they fired Nathaniel Hackett, Justin Al was the offensive coordinator, and we started to see Russell Wilson play better. And I'm hoping that he, takes that from the end of last year with the confidence, brings it into this year, and get the year started out on the right foot here.
I know, Joe, you liked Rosberg better than Hackett.
Hey, yeah, just somebody confident. It's pretty bad at, week 2, your head coach is like, I'm not a good enough coach to manage the team. I got to hire somebody that's older to just be in my headset and basically play the game, call the game for me. That's how bad it was last year. Nathaniel Hackett was just so incompetent. It was crazy. And then it's like, how do you let him keep going after that too? He's basically saying, I can't do this. I need Rosberg up there in my headset. Just hire Rosberg at that point. But
real quick. I want to see how confident you guys are. Will Russell Wilson be the quarterback of the Broncos in the 2024 season?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think so. I think it's also largely tied to his contract. I think that, and the Broncos, to kind of tie back to what you were saying about the Raiders, they feel like a team without any direction. The Broncos at least feel like they have a direction, and it is put all our eggs in the Russell Wilson and Sean Payton basket and hope that, they can strike gold. And if they can make it, make a run in the playoffs, even if they don't win a Super Bowl, that will feel much better than having the 5th pick that you traded away for the quarterback. But yeah, I think that he'll be the quarterback this year. He'll be the quarterback next year. I think if they don't make sizable steps this and next year, 2025 might be the year where they're just bad to start and accept their fate of we made a terrible decision. But I think that next year he certainly will be.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely not as confident. I think if Sean Payton has basically done whatever he can to not tie himself to Russell Wilson. So if Russell Wilson looks as bad as he did last year, I could easily see a way the Broncos just eat a bunch of cap space, and move on from Russell Wilson in 2024. But I expect him to play better. So, I expect him to be the quarterback in 2024. But I do think if it goes bad, he could be out next year.
Yeah, Joe and I have had conversations about this, so I know where he stands. He's a little worried about where things will go, but that contract, that dead cap is no joke. I definitely agree, Tristan. So, all right, transitioning over to the fantasy football side, because that is what our channel is primarily about. We're going to go through each team in the AFC West, and we're going to ask for a sleeper for each team. So let's start with the Kansas City Chiefs. What are you guys' sleepers for them?
Yeah, for me, I was, looking through and kind of struggling to figure out who my sleeper would be here. But I'm going to decide to go with Sky Moore. He was a guy that was really hyped last year, pretty disappointing. I do expect bigger things and a bigger role for him in this offense. They have Marcus Valdez-Scantling, who's basically just a boomer bust player down the field. Juju Smith-Schuster's gone. I know they have Kadarius Toney. He's shown that he's got the injury issues and can't really stay on the field, so we'll see how that goes. So I think Sky Moore could be definitely more involved than last year, and where you can get him, he's kind of that post-type sleeper from last year.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. I almost went with Sky Moore. I ended up going with Jerick McKinnon as my sleeper for them, which is it's kind of weird to call him a sleeper because he was so good in the playoffs. But from kind of what I am seeing, or kind of the feel that I get, is a lot of people think that Isaiah Pacheco is going to be the lead running back, or kind of the one that you want. And I think that Jerick McKinnon is going to cost less or similar and outproduce him. So for me, it's Jerick McKinnon. If you want to go super deep sleeper, I almost went with Justin Ross. He was on the practice squad, I think, and on the IR all last year. I loved him as a college wide receiver, and his crazy neck injury story. I hope that he makes it onto the field, and he has all the talent in the world. It's more injury related, and their wide receiver room, as you just mentioned, isn't exactly the most star-studded one. So they could use a big-bodied, talented receiver. The last thing Mahomes needs is another weapon. But
yeah, I thought about going in the wide receiver room, but I don't know. Just like last year, Mahomes said, I'm going to throw it to a different guy each week. So I'm actually going to go with a comatose sleeper, as Andrew Hall would say, and go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, I know maybe people are thinking like, well, didn't you know what happened at the end of last season? Yeah, I do. But he actually played well he was bound for regression. He was just getting touchdowns over touchdowns and wasn't getting a lot of play. But I'm not convinced. Pacheco obviously played well, but I feel like they still football teams are different. They look at teams, they're not like fantasy managers. They're like, based on this team that we're playing, like, we're going to tap on your shoulder. Hey, we need you this game. I don't feel like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is just like gone. Like right now, his value, even this isn't Dynasty, but in a Dynasty perspective, his value is in the absolute cellar. Like you could get him for a bag of chips. So to me, it's like, look, he has been able to do well in the past. And to me, throw a dart at the end of your draft. And if he doesn't do anything near the end, then you cut him. But to me, he's an interesting one. But going over to the Chargers, guys, who is your sleeper for the Chargers?
Yeah, my sleeper for the Chargers is actually going to be, Gerald Everett. I know that everyone wants to, talk about Quentin Johnston and their new toy, and they got, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as well. But Gerald Everett was actually really solid in his first year with the Chargers last year. He averaged like 9.3 fantasy points per game last year, and I think that could take a bump this year, especially with Kellen Moore. He seems to know how to use the tight ends and get them open and scheme for it. So I think Gerald Everett could improve from his season last year and have a good year this year.
I actually, it's interesting. I almost to go back, I almost also went with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I just don't think that it's going to be Isaiah Pacheco. So I think that's my my main takeaway from that. But for the Chargers, I kind of struggled with this one. Like their team seems kind of set for what it is. I mean, Quentin Johnston, you could call him a sleeper, but I think everybody's excited about him, so he's not really a sleeper. I went with Parham, the backup tight end. So it's funny that you went with Gerald Everett. And that is mostly because Everett struggles to stay healthy. Having him on several dynasty teams, he usually makes it to the IR for most of the season. So I like the idea of it. And I think it's more so really the Chargers tight end that I think is a player that you want to have on your team. I just feel like at the cost, Parham's not going to cost you much of anything. Everett might cost you a little bit more, and kind of after a certain point, all the tight ends are the same. So I'd rather take, I'd rather be the last one to take some more flyer tight end guys than spending a more middle round pick on a tight end that's basically has the same outcome as most of the rest of them. So. I like the philosophy, but I just went with a different tight end.
So my sweeper is going to be a letdown based on what you guys just said, but my guy is Quentin Johnston. And here I'll add a little wrinkle to it. I think I would rather have Quentin Johnston over Mike Williams. How about that? For me, when it comes down to it, I've always been a Mike fan, and you can attest to this, Joe. I've been a Mike Williams fan since the beginning. Yeah. But they basically got a newer, younger version of Mike Williams. I think Keenan Allen could slide in the slot, which means that you're going to have, Keenan Allen in the slot with Mike Williams and Quentin Johnston outside. And, Quentin Johnston is an interesting prospect. I actually, in the beginning of the process, I really was starting to fade him. You heard a bunch of analysts talk about how he's this huge body catcher and how he's going to be, he's going to be more of a bust. But then I started thinking about it a little more, and just like his yard after the catch ability for a player his size is pretty remarkable. And I think, Justin Herbert is one of the best quarterbacks in our league. So to me, it's like, okay, you're talking about Keenan Allen's getting older. He's probably off the team next year. Mike Williams is probably not going to last much longer. So you're talking about most likely the number one option in the Chargers offense being Quentin Johnston paired up with Justin Herbert. So we know Keenan Allen and Mike Williams can't stay healthy. It seems like every year they're banged up and they're going to go out a few games. So now they've got a couple guys in the stable with Josh Palmer and him. So I like Quentin Johnston.
I think that it speaks to the Chargers' difficulty keeping players healthy, because all their starters we just talked about have staying healthy concerns. And so, it wouldn't shock me if week 5 that Quentin Johnston is their healthy receiver and is just getting peppered with targets and ends up being a really good fantasy option. So I considered that. I feel like, the only reason I tried to go elsewhere was because I think picking an early round draft pick from the NFL draft as a sleeper is kind of hard to argue that they're really much of a sleeper. I don't disagree with anything that you said, and I do think that there is a higher ceiling there than many of the other rookie receivers that are around. So I do like that.
So heading over to the Las Vegas Raiders, what is your guys' sleeper for them?
Yeah, for the Raiders, I went with Hunter Renfrow. Most people want to talk about Jacoby Myers and him, the buzz coming over from New England, and both Jimmy Garoppolo and him come from the New England system. But at the end of the day, the Las Vegas Raiders, they traded away Waller. They don't have Foster Moreau anymore. I know they have Michael Mayer at tight end. He's a rookie. So to me, the middle of the field for their offense is kind of open. And that's where I think Hunter Renfrow could just get peppered with targets in the middle of the field from Garoppolo. And I like his potential.
Yeah, I like the Hunter Renfrow pick. I strongly considered it as well. I went with similar thinking and a different option again. I went with Austin Hooper, which I kind of forgot that he was there. Rookie tight ends are kind of most of the time not fantasy relevant. There certainly have been a few that have outstanding rookie years. But it's basically the same thinking that, they're going to need to, like, Devontae Adams is going to get plenty of targets, but after that, there's kind of nobody really that you feel super confident in. I know Renfro had some really good fantasy production previously, and so it wouldn't shock me if it was him again. But a big-bodied tight end over the middle of the field when Jimmy G wants to check it down over and over and over doesn't seem like a bad idea. And whether he's throwing it to Renfro or to Hooper, I think one of the two, if not both of them, are going to have a better return on where they're picked than a lot of people think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of racked my brain on this one because Devontae is the obvious guy who's going to get volume there, right? But then the question is, who's the second guy? I think that's what we're trying to figure out. And can Jimmy Garoppolo support multiple players? I mean, if you think about his time in San Francisco, other than maybe Kittle and Debo had that kind of unique year where he got a lot of his fantasy production from just running the ball, not even getting it thrown to by Garoppolo. So can Jimmy G really support multiple options? My pick is Michael Mayer. I want to say that he was referred to as Baby Gronk before this other young person is being referred to as Baby Gronk. So, he has a very similar style. And obviously Josh McDaniels has a big familiarity, with the play of Gronkowski. Hooper, I think I know he was your sleeper, but for me, it was just like he was great with the Falcons. And then after that, after he left there, he went to Cleveland. And then after that, I think he went to Tennessee, and he really was, a nobody. I think Mayer is going to be the starter there. I think that I know the talent on rookie tight ends. Obviously, I guess I'm just a big fan of rookie tight ends. But you got to remember, too, this class in general, though, is not your typical tight end class. I mean, you had the likes of Daniel Jeremiah coming out and saying this was the best tight end class we've seen in decades. So I think that's also something to kind of keep in mind because we're trying to reference fantasy football production for rookie tight ends in the past 10 or 15 years when those classes fail in comparison to the class that was this year. So I think we could see rookie records or close to it from a lot of these contributors for tight ends, especially the likes of Mayer and Kincaid. But yeah, so my sleeper is Michael Mayer.
It wouldn't shock me if Hooper, like if it is Mayer and he's just better already and he's the starter. I think that, like, again, it's a similar line of thinking. It's just a matter of which player is going to be in that role that is the middle of the field check down guy. So wouldn't shock me at all if it was Mayer. I strongly considered him as well. And I would, I kind of hedged or shied away from him just because of the rookie tight end thing. And the tight end position at the NFL level is a lot more than kind of your big athletic tight end in college that catches a lot of passes because they're just bigger and more dominant. There's a lot more to it. But then again, Notre Dame is really good at producing NFL ready tight ends or close to it. So it really wouldn't shock me if Mayer has a big year.
Well, and the other thing too is, obviously Josh McDaniels is very accustomed to running 12 personnel with the Patriots. I could see them running a lot of 12 personnel. They have Hooper, they have Mayer, and then they also have O.J. Howard. I don't really know. Maybe not all of them make the team.
Yeah, who was one of the other generational tight end prospects when he was, supposed to. Like, I always struggle going back and forth with those. This class is one of the best we've seen in whatever, because half of the time I believe that they believe it, whoever it is that's saying it, and then half of the time it's like, yeah, but you said that 4 years ago. And so it's just hard to know, because it's not that I disagree that this class looks really, really good, but it wasn't that many years ago that we had a three tight end first round of the NFL draft. So it's just hard, but then you have to compare the different classes and to say like, well, were there 3 taken because the other positions were weaker or whatever. But it was the Njoku, Ingram, OJ Howard year is the one I'm thinking of.
Okay.
At least I'm pretty sure that was the 3 that were taken. So yeah, like my thing with it is it's just any, like, not specific to tight ends or to Daniel Jeremiah by any means. He's one of the best and knows plenty more about football than most people will ever learn in their lives. So I don't mean it in that regard, but it's like easy to fall in love with the new class. Like, in the Devy world and in the Dynasty world, it happens all the time that, this class is good, but wait till next year's. And so it's just hard for me to get like too excited. And, I kind of probably err on the side of pessimism, especially for like redraft teams. I don't end up having a lot of rookies on redraft teams just because the hype is usually too high. And you end up, having to overdraft them for where they end up producing. And maybe you hit the one that has a massive year and you might win your league because of it. But more times than not, you're drafting a guy that is, 4th on the depth chart, at wide receiver. And you hope that by the time the season gets there, they're really a contributor. So, not to go off on too crazy of a rant, but I feel a little too, it's just too risky for me to go with rookies, especially in redrafts.
I mean, I think it's completely valid. And, they had talked about even in the mock draft season, they were anticipating that this draft was going to have 3 or possibly 4 first-round times, which would have been a record. We only saw 1. So, but I mean, obviously those other ones were drafted pretty early in the second, with, Musgrave, Laporta, and Michael Mayer. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it makes a lot of sense. I definitely see your point there. So going over to your guys' Denver Broncos, who is the sleeper for the Broncos?
Yeah, I actually, surprisingly, I think I had the most trouble finding figuring out who I wanted the sleeper to be for the Broncos. I had a much easier time with the other teams, but I decided to go with Marvin Mims. They drafted him in the 2nd round. I know it's a crowded receiver room. I expect them to move on from one of these wide receivers, in training camp, prior, possibly before the start of the season. And I think Marvin Mims is going to kind of take over that KJ Hamler role. KJ Hamler, is a very explosive player when he's healthy. That's been his problem. He just constantly having the hamstring injuries, can't stay on the field, so they can't utilize him in the offense. And, Sean Payton said he wanted to shake up the wide receiver room. They trade up to get Mims. And I think he could carve himself out a pretty good sized role in his rookie year here.
I love Marvin Mims and loved watching him at Oklahoma. So I would love that if that is the case. I also struggled with the Broncos, and part of it's just because, like, I don't know what to expect from their off. Like, I think they can't be worse than they were, but Sean Payton has a unique style of offense, and I don't know if it'll be the same as it was with Drew Brees. Drew Brees is a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. Russell Wilson's a really, really good quarterback, but he might structure the offense very differently. It's just kind of a huge unknown, and so I kind of struggled, but I did end up going with Russell Wilson as my sleeper, and I think it kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier, that I don't think that he's going to be the MVP like caliber player that he was at times. But I think that he will be much closer to that than what we saw last year. And, if you're playing in a 1 quarterback league, you can probably get him way late. I would imagine if you're playing in like super flex or 2 quarterback leagues, he's certainly somebody that I think will, he'll go earlier, but I think he'll way out produce the slot that he's taken at. Sean Payton is really good at scoring points. So, I think that if you're looking for a guy that's kind of under the radar that might outproduce their draft slot on the Broncos, quarterback is tough because there's, if you play in one quarterback leagues, they don't have a ton of value, but I just kind of struggled elsewhere. And I thought his value might be way lower than what he ends up doing.
So my sleeper for the Broncos is Greg Dulcich. He's a guy that I was kind of waffling on, and when they trade for Adam Troutman, you and I talked about it, Joe. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was a good sign for him, with Sean Payton bringing back one of his, former players. Troutman always had the buzz that he was going to be this. I think he came from a smaller school. People thought that he was, going to really do well. So when Sean Payton traded for him, I didn't like him. But I heard the magic word from Sean Payton. And that magic word, if you listen to his press conference, is vision. He sees a vision for Greg Dulcich. But he says that it means something. And he said that he thinks that he'll play the Joker role, which Alvin Kamara played the Joker role, I believe, with the New Orleans Saints. So that tells me that he's got a plan for Greg Dulcich, and maybe they will play more 12 personnel, and Adam Troutman will just be there to block. I think, Joe, you've mentioned this in the past. I think PFF rated him as the number one blocking tight end. So he can go ahead and block, and Greg Dulcich can go out and catch passes. So I think Greg Dulcich could be a sneaky play. I think his ADP right now for tight ends is pretty low, and I think the reason why is because people are just down on the Broncos and down on Russell Wilson. They just hate on the guy and the team. So I like Greg Dulcich.
Yeah, I feel like he's starting to get some buzz around him and moving up. And then maybe I'm just biased, and it's the Scott Fishbowl chat that I'm in, but they everyone in there loves him. So I feel like he's kind of rising up, and it makes sense. And I really think the Broncos will be playing a lot of 12 personnel because Sean Payton wants to run the ball, and I think they're going to run the ball a lot. And a lot of things are going to be run off of play action and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Adam Troutman went to Dayton. One of my random skills is knowing way too many colleges for any fantasy relevant NFL player. But I don't know if we're going to get into all of the busts for all of the teams, but Dulcich was actually my bust for the Broncos.
Wow.
So it's interesting to hear that. And I think for me, it's not a matter of if he's talented enough. I think that it's kind of that people are like, I know the Troutman news kind of tanked his value a little bit, but I think a lot of people are like, he's going to be the Jimmy Graham type, tight end for Sean Payton's offense. And, all due respect to Greg Dulcich, he's not Jimmy Graham. Like Jimmy Graham is like 6'6", like freaky athletic player. Greg Dulcich is a good athletic NFL tight end. And I think he could finish, he could sneak into like tight end 12 or 13. And that would be a really good year for him. But for me, at least on any fantasy team, I want to try to get a difference maker at tight end because, after like the top 4 or 5 tight ends, the difference between, 6 and 16 is maybe a point a game. I'm sure the stat is not exactly that, but it's basically that there's a huge range in there that they're not that much different. And so it wouldn't shock me if Greg Dulcich has a nice year compared to what he has had last year, and maybe is a promising up and coming player. But I think that he's not going to be Jimmy Graham for the Broncos, and a lot of people, maybe I'm overestimating the number of people that really are excited about him. But from kind of the leagues I've been in and some of the ways that people have talked about him and trying to trade for him or whatever, he's valued a lot higher than I think that his production will be.
So Tristan did allude to it. We are going to be talking about busts. I'm going to ask you guys to give me one bust for the division. It doesn't have to be, you could just be rapid fire. You could give me an explanation, but I want to know who is your big bust for the AFC West.
Yeah, you kind of alluded to it earlier in the show, Steve, and, my bust pick is Mike Williams. I think he's really just relied on being that one deep threat that the Chargers have had on their team, and it's worked for him when he's healthy. But, now they got the younger, better deep threat in Quentin Johnston. And, I think it's time for him to kind of take over that deep threat role with the Chargers offense.
I like it. I'm going to give you two, even though you asked for rapid fire one. It's because I alluded to one earlier. Isaiah Pacheco was my Chiefs bust. Again, I just don't think he's going to be the one that has the most points from the running back position for the Chiefs. And then kind of a bolder one is Josh Jacobs. I tend to just go away. Like I had him in Scott Fishbowl last year and absolutely loved it. I got to, I think, the semifinals last year.
Wow.
Had a really good year. Thank you, Josh Jacobs. But when a running back has an outstanding season, I tend to try to pivot elsewhere. So I think that he's, and you mentioned it with the contract situation and the Raiders and who knows what they're going to be looking like and just a lot of question marks. So it wouldn't shock me to see Josh Jacobs, significantly underperform his draft slots or his draft slot and have a lot of people, kind of bummed that they have him on their team.
Yeah, Tristan, I feel the same way. My bust is Josh Jacobs as well. I think
Great pick.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Here's the thing, right? He was a leading rusher last year. Of course, I've always liked him, and then of course I'm like, you should fade him this year. He's playing in the Hall of Fame games. Zamir White got drafted. He's probably not even going to play. And what are you doing? He's the league leading rusher. It's ridiculous. But anyways, I really don't. I could very much see a possibility where he doesn't even play week 1, or he doesn't participate in training camp for a majority of the camp. I feel like that's usually not a good recipe for success, especially for the running back position that we've seen that in the past. So I think he's going to hold out for a decent bit. Maybe he does play, maybe he doesn't. But even if he does, I don't think he's not the caliber of running back that we're talking about, that like a Derrick Henry, right? He's been perennial. Like every year, he's one of the top leading rushers every year, right? I don't see that happening with Josh Jacobs. Now, they could rely heavily on him with the running because who do they have to throw? We talked about that. But based on his ADP, it's too rich for me. And I think it's kind of a gamble for you to do it. I think, like Tristan was saying, I think you're going to pay the price. So I will say my bust is Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think like him and Saquon, I think they'll play week 1. I think basically they'll miss the training camp. But if they do, it's going to take a few weeks for them to get acclimated and get back into that, football conditioning. And we've seen a lot of times when players miss the training camp as well, they tend to get injured. So it definitely is risky, with Saquon and Josh Jacobs this year if they do miss all the training camp.
So that concludes our show, breaking down the AFC West division for the upcoming NFL season. Before we sign off, Tristan, thanks so much for coming on the show. Where can others find your great work?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun to, wish for the best and plan for the worst for the Broncos. But yeah, you can find me mostly on Twitter. I'm at the Tristan Cook. Because at Tristan Cook hasn't tweeted in more than a decade and won't delete his account. So I had to just specify that I am the Tristan Cook. But you can find me on there. I'm always happy to talk about fantasy football or anything sports related. But yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. A first-time guest on the show, and we greatly appreciate you coming on. If you did enjoy this video, we are a new channel, so we ask you to go ahead and like the video. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Comment below on who you think will win the AFC West. And also you can follow us on Apple and Spotify podcasts. If you haven't done so already, we've done an AFC East video, an AFC North video, and an AFC South video with all guests coming on the show, breaking it down. You definitely want to check that out. We got the NFC coming up, so you're not going to want to miss that. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time.